The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
Estou passando nesse podcast para dividir uma informação que fez toda a diferença na minha vida. Quer fazer pós-graduação, mas tá impossível correr de um lugar para o outro?
Pois é, ainda mais com o trânsito.
Então você precisa conhecer a educação à distância do Senac. Sabia que é nota máxima no MEC? E tem diversos cursos de pós-graduação para te levar ainda mais longe. 100% online, sem necessidade de TCC e com acesso direto a todos os professores.
Ah, saber isso fez diferença sim.
Inscreva-se já na pós-graduação EAD. Quer saber? Senac EAD.
Sorry, can we just... Sorry, my family... Guys, I'm doing a podcast. Tēnā koutou katoa, welcome to Gone by Lunchtime. My name is Toby Manhire, and much like the Member of Parliament from Mount Albert, I am stuck at home isolating with COVID in the house, but personally, relentlessly negative, 99.6% naturally immune. Happily, Ben Thomas and Annabelle Mather, and also Sunny, the dog, are in the studio with our silver-voiced audio guru, Tiahe Butler. Hello, everybody.
Kia ora.
Morena.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. Prince Harry is also in the studio. Prince Harry's there, between Annabelle and Ben, but we're not going to let him speak. Sorry about that, Harry.
By appearing on this podcast, the average cost of each podcast Harry makes has come down to about $23 million.
That's right. That's right. It's quite a good idea, though, I think, having a permanent podcast host who never says a thing. You know, it's pushing boundaries. A big thanks to members, without whom you would be listening right now to Joe Rogan or lying in silence, contemplating the ineffable mystery of the human soul. Thank you, Spin-off members. Right now it is brunch time on Wednesday, May 11, 2022. And we're going to talk, among other things, about Te Pāti Māori, Shane Reti, Trevor Mallard, emissions budgets. But first, Ben Thomas and Annabelle Mather are fizzing with excitement because it's only 7 sleeps until budget day. Ben Thomas, you have worked in the ministerial office of Christopher Finlayson. You have seen a little bit of how the meat pie is made. The budget will have been done and dusted, printed indeed, for some time, I guess. When does the process start? Like months and months in advance? Last year?
It's essentially sort of as people are hungover and dusting themselves off from the drinks in the Minister of Finance's office on the 8th floor of the Beehive. The 7th floor of the Beehive. The next morning, Treasury officials will come and present them with the working papers for the next year's budget.
Oh, God, how annoying.
It's a blue Powerade and a stack of in-tray papers. Actually, I think it even actually starts a little bit before then. It's this constant sort of rotation. One thing that's the budget day is sort of like telethon for political nerds. It's this big event that's televised. There's all these sort of little side projects and quests, you know, as you can
coin trails.
Yeah, you can. There's Easter eggs everywhere. You can pour through the consolidated accounts, looking for sort of new spending in every area. There'll be the main storyline, which is the key press releases that come with the budget pack that gets given to journalists. And that's the sort of narrative that the government wants to set out of the budget.
Is that like a goodie bag?
Yeah, sort of. It will normally be a combination of, first of all, the future look at, the prospects, from this, what you predict that this budget will do to the economy and how the economy will track in the next 5 years. And you'll boast about surpluses that you haven't actually made yet, but that have been predicted. You'll boast about getting deficits down, even though it's 4 years away. And you'll talk about how the country's on the right track, which is exactly what you want heading into an election year. And the other thing will be, the new spending promises, of which this year, absolute bonanza, $6 billion set aside in the new operating expenditure for the government. I think it might be a record high for a budget. Of course, we had that massive $80 billion COVID recovery and response fund. That massive, you might want to call it a slush fund. Because once we had sort of finished with COVID and once we'd sort of paid for vaccinations and stuff, there was a lot of money left over, and it turned out that an essential part of the COVID response was slashing the fuel excise tax in response to the war on Ukraine. And a lot of other stuff that was only very tangentially related. But
biolabs in Ukraine, after all, think about it. Join the dots.
But the government and the opposition this is what the budget really is, right? We talk about confidence in supply for a government, especially when it normally comes up when you're having coalition agreements. Confidence is just, do you have the confidence of the House? Do a majority of people in Parliament say that you can form a government? Yes, that's confidence. Supply is any money that the government spends has to be appropriated by Parliament, and that's what the budget is. The budget is saying this is the amount of money that you're allowed to raise in taxes or allowed to earn from, and this is what you can spend. You can't spend it without Parliament's permission. And so it's interesting. People talk about sort of the New Zealand government as if it's a household, and there's lots of problems with that metaphor. But one of the sort of formal problems with the metaphor is that if you go through the budget documents and you try and add everything up, you won't get sort of a balanced figure. It's not actually done in the sort of way that business accounts are done, where you've got sort of income and expenditure. The budget documents are actually talking about appropriations, which is just how much the government is allowed to spend. So it's not. We talk about the government books, but they're not really the government books. The budget is actually just what it's sort of allowing itself to spend in the future. It's an intention to spend money that Parliament then rubber stamps. And so it can be, it can be very confusing, sort of trying to read these documents in the same way as like a budget for your August, where you sort of say, well, we're going to cut down Netflix and that'll let me get, sort of one McDonald's Happy Meal. Was that Sunny?
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Sunny's contribution was, I missed that. Sunny?
She just sort of choked up a little furball.
Oh, yeah.
But the thing is, so anyway, on the day, the government is trying to set a narrative out of all of this, right? Out of tens of billions of dollars worth of spending, they're trying to say, actually, there's a cohesive theme that runs through this that tells you what sort of government we are and where we're going as a country. And within that, you've got all of these individual ministers who all have been working on their budget bids for, months. They may have started a year early as well, with the help of their officials trying to get funding for their particular areas and initiatives within it. And they're trying for the absolute peak, which is to get their press release about their new initiative into the budget pack, so that people will conclude that's part of the narrative, or even better, a pre-budget announcement in the 2 weeks leading up.
Why do they do pre-budget announcements?
So the budget used to be super secret, right? There was this idea that because the government is such a big part of the New Zealand economy, and because the budget used to be where new taxes were announced. So in the old days, on budget day, I think the speech would be read out at about sort of 6 p.m. at night. And before that, you'd have these classic Kiwiana scenes of people going and buying up sort of bootloads worth of liquor and cigarettes in case the tax went up on them. So there used to be this super secrecy about it because it was sort of market sensitive, it was consumer sensitive. These days, that's kind of, these days there's much better reporting throughout the year about what the state of the government's books and what it's intending to do and how much money it's intending to raise. And so there isn't that same secrecy. There's still a convention around it, which is why there was such a freak out, when there was that so-called hack of the budget in 2018, wasn't it?
Definitely one of them.
2019. which turned out to be the National Party just going to the Treasury website and searching in the search bar, budget 2019, and it was apparently all just out there. So, so now pre-budget announcements, really, it's just a PR thing. It's just making sure that these announcements don't get lost in the sort of big...
And it's part of a wider sort of political spin culture now that means that you need to announce things over and over again. I mean, I remember in the Blair government, they used to sometimes triple announce things. You get a kind of direction of travel, you get a budget announcement, and then you get the laying out of the policy, and each are made to appear like we are going to spend £500 million on something, but it's all the same money over and over again, right?
Definitely. And so you'll have post-budget announcements as well of initiatives that were in the budget but weren't deemed sort of sufficiently important or integral enough to the narrative to be either in the budget pack or in the pre-announcements. So you might have an announcement 3 weeks later about something that you got funding for that was just sort of overlooked at the time. And there's a real fight for this. When in the 20, I think I wrote about this for the spin-off, but in the 2009 budget, which was the first one of the John Key era, and that was where there were cuts. I think they wanted 5% cuts across the board because of the global financial crisis, but there were some increases, and we managed to get some increases in arts spending for all these sort of government-funded organisations that had lost sponsorship and stuff because of the financial crisis.
The golden age, Ben. The golden age.
And we managed to get a press release into the package. I think it was by far the least popular announcement of the entire budget, including cuts. Increasing arts funding. But the other thing, there's a lot of negotiation that goes on. Normally with press releases, when you announce a policy, you've got a lot of latitude. Because if it's the budget, that's really the finance minister's thing. You've got to go through the finance minister's press sec. They'll vet everything. They'll go through it with a fine-tooth comb to make sure it's all on point. So, for instance, Bill English vetoed us, saying that we had allocated money for essential arts infrastructure. I think he said something like, Christopher, infrastructure is pipes and roads. it's not orchestras.
Not bagpipes. That's what he said.
I mean, he's right, of course, but, it did dull the impact of our announcement a little bit.
Hey, Annabelle, one of the kind of most conspicuous of the pre-budget announcements, which was made on Sunday by Porter Williams, was about funding for police numbers, 600 million, including a pledge to ratio 1 copper per 480 people. I quite like the idea of it being one. Like we each get into cohorts of 480 people, and each have our one police officer. We have their mobile number, and we can, just sort of keep in touch if shit goes down. Yeah. But that also, targeting gangs seemed quite deliberately staged in order to sort of an attempt to spike the guns of the Ram Raiders, as it were, to sort of show we're doing something about this supposed spate of youth crime.
Yeah, well, we've had weeks of hysteria about the Ram raids and actually a lot of concern about the increase in gang violence that's been imported into New Zealand via the 501. So, yeah, it seems like it's a bit of a defensive move on the government's part, and I imagine that the budget that will be announced will be quite centrist and focus on those issues that that kind of centre voters tend to care about the most, like law and order and those sorts of things. I think, fair pay agreements and all of that won't be like a centrepiece of the budget. It'll be more around those issues that centre voters care about, in the hope that they can start to win back, turn the tide on Luxon's growing popularity.
Grant Robertson has been trailing that climate and health are the sort of two big poles of the tent. We'll come back to climate in a bit because that adds an extra kind of complication to budget season. Health is obviously a major overhaul of the health system. We'll touch on that in a moment too.
I think it'll be interesting in terms of the Māori Health Authority to see what sort of horse trading has gone on, or if there's going to be a bit of, ram raiding Peter to pay Paul in terms of, the whānau order budgets versus the Māori Health Authority.
Yeah. And then on top of all that, the great sort of looming narrative that we've been grappling with over the recent weeks and months, as much of the world, is the cost of living crisis. And Ben, do you think there will be something in the budget that is a sweetener or, as the Australians will put it, a hip pocket type, relatable something or other? Grant Robertson has said there won't be any generalised tax cuts, but maybe there'll be something beyond a likely extension of half-price public transport and the deduction in the fuel tax?
Well, yeah, I think the extension of the fuel tax subsidy is, I think that's pretty much a given. As the empty tank light came on in my car, and so I started looking up at 91 prices along Dominion Road, and I was like, it's getting pretty near $3 again. So I think if they let that run its course as planned, you would actually find that shortly after the budget, prices will be well over $3 again, and I think that that would be very bad politically for the government. Especially in the wake of no general tax cuts. You could probably expect tax cuts, or at least movement on the brackets next year, I would say, in the prior to the election. Robertson, of course, is the architect of that interest-free student loan policy from 2005, which a lot of commentators, including me, think won the election for Labour that year. His preference and Labour's preference, over quite a long time, for the last two governments, has been for, those sort of targeted subsidies or benefits, rather than sort of global kind of sort of ambient tax cuts. So I think that they'll probably be working on something in that area. They've already done a fair bit. They keep rolling over and doubling the winter energy payment and all of these sort of little things that are probably appreciated by the people who get them and sort of otherwise sort of fall out of our sight, I think, if you're not a recipient. In terms of, what is that narrative that they're going to be creating out of this budget? In the lead up to it, Robertson has sort of talked about, basically being the sensible dad. He's paying for health, he's paying for climate, he's paying for the things that we need, not anything splashy or, not treats. Whether he's sort of under promising so that he can over deliver on the day for individual
expectation management, surely.
Well, you'd think so, because the sorts of things that have been flagged, like paying off DHB debt, which is, first of all, very considerable. It's a lot of money, but at the same time, is about as sort of exciting as, getting your monthly paycheck and then putting it all, paying off your credit card and your parking fines. It doesn't really give you that sort of, bonanza sort of feeling. And so, politically, you would say that's not a great return on your $6 billion. So, whether they'll be looking at, maybe even minor tax bracket adjustments sort of at the lower levels, certainly not touching that 180 grand threshold, probably maybe not even getting into that 33% tax bracket, but maybe at the lower range. Who knows? Might be sort of extra, turbocharging further working for families, that kind of thing. But, by and large, I don't think you'd be looking, you probably wouldn't put a higher purchase on, a PlayStation or a flat screen TV in anticipation of paying it off from what you get out of the budget.
The difficulty that the government has is that anything they try to do in the budget to mitigate inflation, the opposition will call, they will say that spending is inflationary. Is that the right term? So
inflationary.
Sorry, aroha mai. So they're kind of stuck in a bit of a catch-22. But just picking up on the winter energy payment, it's kind of like one of those hallmark moves of this government where by being sort of an act of equality is actually a lot about creates more inequity, because basically every superannuant is eligible for the winter energy payment, even though there's like probably tens of thousands of them that don't need it.
30,000 of them earning over $100,000 a year before their super.
And then there's whānau where that winter who live in the heart of the king country, where they have the most astronomical power bills and pay 2 power bills a month, could actually do with more money than what the superannuant's getting. And it's just one of those things where you are literally throwing money at a problem instead of going in there and using legislation to deal with the heart of the issue.
Em busca de novo hit para animar seu dia? Então clique no banner e ouça a playlist com as melhores músicas. Um oferecimento Nova Fiat Titano. A nova picape da Fiat faz bonito nos terrenos mais desafiadores. Performance com motor turbo diesel 4x4 e câmera 360 graus off-road, que ajudam você a ultrapassar qualquer obstáculo. Sem falar que ela tem a maior caçamba da categoria. Tá esperando o que para conhecer? Nova Fiat Titano. Chegou a sua vez de fazer história. Paz no Trânsito começa por você.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour government, a podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards it.
There's a radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour government, made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on the Spin-Off or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Climate Adaptation.
We are the Pōtiki of the Taiao.
And the words of those keeping the home fires burning.
It's more than just going along and planting some trees. You got to be able to defend that place to the end of your life.
We have the solutions. We just need to come back to the belief in ourselves as rangatira.
Join me, Nadine Hura, and Ruia Āpirehama, the Kōpapa Korangi Series 2, Ahi Ka. Brought to you by Te Komato Te Tonga, the Deep South Challenge, out now on the Spin-Off Podcast Network or wherever you get your podcasts.
So a couple of days ago on Monday, we had a budget of a different sort in the form of 3, in fact. It was like Christmas. We had 3 emissions budgets, which cover periods of years leading up to and beyond to 2030. And they basically track out how we have to sink the lid on our emissions as a country. And those budgets then, they're like a kind of, I guess, a sort of drawing dots on a map of where you want to go. And then on this Monday, before the budget, and budget week, Monday coming, we will have the emissions reduction plan, which is a critical part of the Zero Climate Act, and that will put the kind of meat on the bone there, to terribly mix the metaphor. That will sort of plot out the track on that map and some pretty difficult decisions. It will also probably mean that we'll end up buying some carbon credits abroad, which is pretty questionable in terms of the commitment to the cause. And it will also have some implication. It'll mean that this whole thing is going to have to start hurting a bit in a way that it hasn't so far. It's mostly been relatively light touch. Ben, the timing of it is interesting, running a few days ahead of the budget, and the budget will then fold that in. It's almost as if they want to get that done and then move on to the budget, which might have a bit more of that in terms of that narrative you talk about, a bit more of a positive spin. I'm not sure if people are paying a huge amount of attention to it. Certainly there are people in the rural sector who will be, people in the transport sector who will be. We've had talk about a congestion charge. We're likely to hear about a congestion charge on Monday. And there's also an interesting question about whether or not National gets in behind it, because obviously this thing is going to have a lot more durability if it has cross-party support. Do you think the National Party will get behind it? Do you think this is going to be something that is going to become a major political issue in the lead up to the next election?
As somebody who's worked in Parliament, I'm very pessimistic about a Westminster parliamentary democracy's ability to grapple with climate change, in the sense that, we've had these ambitious, in 2008, Helen Clark and John Key both, I think Clark campaigned on carbon neutral by 2050. Key campaigned on reducing emissions in half by 2030. Now, you would, if you were in 2008 and you were looking forward to 14 years hence, closer to 2030 than you were to 2008, you would think, well, whoever got in at that election, our carbon emissions would be drastically down by 2022. And they are not. they are higher than they've ever been. And it's the same way that, if the global leadership of Ben Thomas will always think that, probably before the summer of 2022, maybe about like September, October, that's when the exercise regime will really start gearing up. And the weight loss will kick in earnest, right? And we see this, even though it's not directly related to emissions reductions, we've seen, this year how people react when petrol becomes very expensive, right? People freak out and they want action and they want it to be reduced in price. Now, that's a real problem when your main mechanism for reducing emissions is a price-based method, which is the ETS. And we saw this as soon as the ETS came in 2009, or even when it was being designed in 2008, there were carve-outs all over the place because as soon as anybody protested and said, well, this is going to make life difficult for our industry, the government would buckle and start giving them free emissions and, and refuse to just sort of be upfront and say, well, this is meant to make things harder. It's meant to make emitting carbon harder and more expensive. That's a feature, not a bug. It's the whole point. It's not even a feature. It's the whole thing, And so I'm very pessimistic about whether these things can work. Sure, National have said they agree to the budget, right? Of course they agree with the budget. Labor agrees with the budget. Will either of these parties actually put in place, the regulatory framework to bring emissions down, or even the cap on the ETS in terms of the maximum amount of carbon emissions to actually bring it down to that level? I mean, touch wood. You'd hope
it's
so,
hard,
but...
I suppose the glimmer of optimism to counter that is that although there's nothing jolly about it, we are seeing quite literally the impacts of climate change. We had that Sea Rise report, which I think a lot of people sat up and took notice of, which showed the maps around the country, showed communities that are facing the very real prospect of managed retreat. Those sorts of real-life impacts mean that we have moved on from those days where there are a lot of people who were either vocally or quietly to themselves thinking, this isn't either A, that real, or B, going to affect me directly. On top of which you have examples from Australia most recently in their election, but also different parts of the world, where while people for a long time said that climate change is, when they're rung up by the pollsters, they say, yep, it's one of the important issues. There's been relatively little sense that it's been something that would actually have any determining effect on people's votes. And I'm not sure if that's the case any longer. I think that is certainly changing. Whether it's rapid or not, whether it's enough to make a difference, I don't know. But Annabelle, it's increasingly going to be part of what determines, what influences people's decisions at the ballot box, don't you think?
Climate change?
Yes.
I'm not sure that it will, to be honest, Tobe. I think it's one of those issues, like Ben says, everybody cares about it, but nobody really wants to make their own personal sacrifice when it comes to using their cars and that sort of thing. But just in terms of the announcements this week, it seems like our government's response is again going to unfairly impact Māori. You would have seen there was an interview on Morning Report this morning about a story. Sorry, not an interview, about how Māori land, which a lot of it is planted in pine, is not going to be exempt under the new strategy, where there's all these carve-outs for, dairy and all of that stuff. Māori and the little vestiges of their whenua that they have left, which is a lot of it quite difficult to utilise over the last few decades. Have been planted in pine to try and get some use out of it, and now those iwi are going to be unfairly stung for it. In terms of the announcement this week about a proposed congestion tax, my experience as a parent trying to get a reo Māori education for your child is that we don't have kura in every neighbourhood and at the end of every street, and whānau often have to travel quite long distances to be able to get their tamariki into a kura where they can learn te reo Māori. So what impact is that going to have on those whānau who are having to, drive from central Auckland to West Auckland, or from South Auckland to West Auckland, or wherever, to get the reo Māori education they want their tamariki to have? So it just seems like there's obviously not enough consultation with Māori about how these issues affect ordinary whānau at a very practical level.
That concern that was raised about this, about pine trees versus natives and sequestration rules and so on, came from the Māori Party, Te Pāti Māori. And let's talk about Te Pāti Māori a bit, because it's reached that point in the electoral cycle. It seems like sometimes under an MMP election you kind of get a year and a half of governing and a year and a half of discussing doing kind of phony coalition negotiations and asking for bottom lines and would you agree with this or that. Most recently, in the last 24 hours, Christopher Luxon has faced a whole bunch of questions about whether or not he would go along with David Seymour enacts the alternative budget that they put out this week, whether or not David Seymour could be finance minister, all this sort of stuff.
What do you call a list of 30 government departments and agencies to be cut?
What?
A good start.
Wow. Thanks, Ben. But I suppose the only good thing about that, really, from Luxon and National's point of view, is that last time they got towards an election, no one was really quizzing them about what impact that might do in the coalition, because no one was seriously considering it as a possibility, whereas now it's obviously the polls are saying it's a real thing. As the polls are saying, indeed, based on the last two, maybe three, that Te Pāti Māori would be in ye olde kingmaker, queenmaker, bossmaker position. Annabelle, and there was the Rawiri Waititi and Debbie Ngaruapaka were interviewed together on Q&A on Sunday, and they were having a very jolly time talking about whether or not they might take, who might take a deputy prime minister role, and so on and so forth. Do you think that Te Pāti Māori would contemplate a relationship with National? I mean, they've said they wouldn't if ACT were at the table, which seems to rule it out. Do you think that it would work for them even to go into a governing relationship, given in the past the electorate has punished them for that?
I think they have to keep all of their options open, but it's abundantly clear that their preference is not to have to enter into a coalition deal with National. Having said that, I don't think that they would want to completely rule out that possibility either, and they might see themselves as having a softening effect on the policies of a potential national government. They are acutely aware that Te Ao Māori fell out of love with them because of their past relationship with National, and I think they've done a really excellent job over the last term of putting the past behind them, selecting the most important issues that resonate with Māori, but also just some key issues that kind of keeps them in the public eye, like the the taonga versus tai issue and all of that. I think they've again done an excellent job this week in terms of, pointing out that Māori are not responsible for climate change, and yet again it's going to be Māori that are unfairly punished as a result of James Shaw's new approach. I think that the difficulty now is that the Labour's Māori MPs see the Māori Party as a serious threat. I think that we can be. It's very, very likely that Deb Ngāti Wapeka will win Te Taiho Wāuru next time. I think there's a possibility that they could win more seats. I think Rawiri will most certainly hold on to Waiariki, and so that makes growing that relationship between Labour and the Māori Party difficult. Having said that, if Labour needs them to govern, they will roll over. They will roll over their Māori MPs to make that happen.
I mean, look, I think Annabelle's right in the sense that Deb and Rawiri have done a great job PR-wise and messaging-wise. They're like, we're not, Peter Sharples, the Uncle Tom sitting at the table, paying off his mortgage with his ministerial salary. These do not reflect my feelings about Dr. Sir Peter Sharples.
And they've got
a great New Zealander and was a great politician, but there was some very, very pointed attacks on Sharples and Turia, because and Tururoa, as with their association with National, which I often think is sort of unfair. They weren't well. If you think about what the National Party and the Labour Party in government will talk about in terms of their provision for Māori, they talk about whānau ora, which was Dame Tariana Turia's brainchild. And that's survived both governments, and it's increased its funding over the years. So now it's much bigger than it started off as. That's a success story. And the Kermit-X, reserve, that's still on hold because of Marama Fox and Māori Party, basically kicking up a stink and saying, no, you can't impinge on post-settlement fishing rights just so you can make a nice announcement at the UN. They were actually a lot more effective than people thought, but they were bad at selling their message. In contrast, Debbie and Rawiri, they're not constructive politicians at all. They don't have a positive vision for pretty much anything. They're not really interested in cutting deals, in sort of affecting actual change. And I think they would probably admit that. They're there to be a sort of protest voice.
Yeah, well, that's their bag, though. They're an opposition party, and they're there to prove a point to Te Ao Māori. It's like a long-term strategy. First of all, they've got to say fuck you to everyone, so that they build their mana chops back up, and then they can start engaging constructively. The other thing too is, in terms of the past Māori Party, I think Peter Sharples always had quite conservative leanings, and Tariana had that massive beef with Helen Clark that she was just never able to move past, and they were appallingly treated by Clark, the whole haters and wreckers and last cab off the rank and all of that stuff. But the thing about this Māori Party is that you have JT in the background, and JT is a Labour man through and through at the end of the day.
I think the other thing that's worth mentioning, just briefly, is Debbie Ngāti Wapeka's work in Taranaki on the vaccine rollout.
That was what I was going to say, because
in a very constructive and very
Debbie Ngāti Wapeka throughout her career has actually been a doer, not a firebrand. She is actually somebody who has an extraordinary record of getting things done, and I think would make an exceptional minister. But
that suggests that the two aren't incompatible, right? Like you can be highly antagonistic as an opposition politician at the same time as doing on the ground some quite constructive stuff.
Yeah, on the ground, but not necessarily in Parliament. You can't have the positioning that the Māori Party has right now and be in government or in coalition, sort of in a constructive way.
The other curiosity that sort of attaches to that is that there's been some speculation that Adrian Rudaffair might be in line as Labour's choice for Speaker, given he's performed pretty well as a deputy, and that could mean he moves to the list, and that would obviously make Te Tai Haoru even more achievable for Debbie Ngaruapaka in the election. Speaking of the Speaker, did you notice that excellent segue? Congratulations to me.
Yeah.
Trevor Mallard. I don't know if you know the name. He's the current Speaker of the House of Representatives, and he has been a little more headline grabbing than most speakers are over the course of this term, particularly. Most recently, it was a kind of bit of a 48-hour wonder, but it was astonishing. At first, Matt King, the former National MP from Northland, posted on his Facebook page that he'd had a trespass notice issued by Parliamentary Security in relation to his appearances during the occupation of Parliament, whatever it was, 6 weeks ago, 7 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago. And this seemed sort of astonishing at first, and also an absolute gift to Matt King, who is at the moment in a bit of a tussle among maybe a dozen different political movements that are trying to harness the energies of that occupation, the so-called freedom movement, to turn them into a political force. This was, a little bit of kind of Streisand effect, Matt King style. And then, then a few hours later, it turned out that Winston Peters, a former Deputy Prime Minister, had also been issued with a trespass notice banning him from Parliament grounds for 2 years. And just seemed astonishing. Now, Mallard tried to make it clear that these were delegated decisions that had been made by the security. I wrote a piece about this too. I won't bore you with the details, but you can read it on the spin-off about the time I was issued with a trespass notice from Parliament for reasons that were quite comical insofar as I wasn't at the event that I was trespassed for.
Safety first.
But this just it was just absolutely flabbergasting. It was just, I don't know, what do you guys think? I sort of struggle to see how they could possibly have ended up in that position.
Yeah, look, I've got a few thoughts on this. I mean, in terms of how they ended up in the position, I think this might have been an example of Mallard, again, trying to do the right thing, which I think is... I genuinely think he has tried as Speaker to improve things, and he just doesn't get it right, which is as good a reason to move somebody on as any. In the sense that, he introduced this sort of weird kind of point system of penalties and rewards. Or it was very, very in keeping with his. This
is in parliamentary question time.
Yeah, in parliamentary question time, very in keeping with his sort of Roger Gnome sort of origins in the 80s, sort of creating the perfect market for a good
market.
Question time by levering the incentives and disincentives. And what it turned it into, Audrey Young, I think, called it a game show. And it just became a debacle where he'd start, deducting 10 supplementary questions and 5, you couldn't even keep it. It was just ridiculous. But I think it did come from a place of good intentions of trying to make question time, better run, to have it conducted with more integrity. And it just didn't work. And I suspect that his actions during the parliamentary protests were the same. I think he genuinely thought that playing Barry Manilow would either lower the temperature or encourage people to leave. But it just turned the whole thing into a farce. And now, I think he probably thought, well, since there were political figures involved in this, since it was highly politicized, since I've been criticized for my conduct during this issue, I should leave this to the professionals, parliamentary security. Now, God bless parliamentary security, but they're not... They're not professionals in the same sense of Liam Neeson in Taken or whatever, right? Like they're professionals in that they have employment contracts.
They do have a certain skill set, but but securing isn't really one of them. Yeah.
And, I think as somebody pointed out, I can't remember who, Claire Trevor pointed out, parliamentary security pretty stretched, chasing chickens around parliamentary grounds if they're released during a protest, And so I think Mallard probably thought, well, I'll remove the politics from it and I'll let, these guys, his job is just to literally walk around Parliament and make sure nobody accidentally brings keys through the metal detector.
So what did they do? Did they just Google who was at the occupation at Parliament?
That's what they said. They said that they gave trespass notices to every person they could identify who had been taken part in the protest and the occupation, which I assume, was just Googling. And obviously Rodney Hyde came up, he got served with one. Winston Peters came up, he got served with one. Now, of course, these people weren't actually occupying. They didn't stay there. They just walked through.
To be fair, I don't think they just Googled. I think they probably did a bit of Facebooking, maybe looked at friends of friends on Facebook and maybe a little bit of Twitter and
maybe
stuff
on their family WhatsApp groups. Hey, did anybody see anyone who was at the... I mean, they did issue trespass notices to all the people who were arrested and, that's hard to argue with. I mean, they didn't seem to issue trespass notices to a bunch of them. They should read my pieces. I've identified many of the occupation leaders and the people who were, some of them, pretty much calling for the storming of Parliament. Maybe those people would get trespass notices, but no, instead the Deputy Prime Minister who wandered through.
I think it was pretty much, I think it was the first page of Google, which as we know is now mainly ads. It was, and so by doing that, by delegating it and trying to keep it professional, this total blunder went through where Peters should never have been trespassed. Irrespective of the optics, he wasn't an occupier, he wasn't an organiser, he was an old has-been politician on the make, looking for some media coverage by doing a walkthrough, getting his daily constitutional. It might have been off to MSD to smooth out any irregularities with his winter energy payment, but he, and it was just another fuck up on this from Mallard. And he was a very good minister in the Clark government. As by all reports, he's a good MP in the 80s. He's been a good constituency MP through the years. It's time to let him go. And
he's a good student of standing orders, and he's quite interested in standing orders committee chewing over nerdily those sorts of facts. He was good interesting in terms of taking on Graham Edgeler's idea that there should be a secret ballot for Speaker. It's just that somehow, I don't know, is it does he love the drama? I don't know, Annabelle. Is it a problem for Jacinda Ardern, I guess, is the ultimate question.
It's becoming a problem. Well, yeah, but not a fatal problem, not going to cost you the election problem, more just like an irritating sideshow that she has to address. I agree with Ben. I don't think he's this insidious actor doing evil shit, even though if you listen to some of the commentary around, playing Barry Manilow, you would think that it was like the worst form of torture in the whole universe. I think that exactly as Ben says, I think he's a well-intentioned guy who just makes some poor decisions, and this one in particular is really not a good look. It also just gives oxygen to people like Winston Peters who, will use it for all it's worth. Is it a sackable offence? I don't think so. Is it a gross abuse of power? No, just a dumb call, really. Is it time for him to move on? Most definitely.
Thank you, Annabelle. That's as good a place as any to wind it up. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Sonny. Thank you, Te Aihe. Thank you, members. Thank you, Prince Harry. We're out. Like us, share us, rank us, review us. Are those the things I should say?
Yeah, they're all good things.
Okay. Love you, bye.
Kia ora, I'm Duncan Grieve, founder of The Spinoff. You can help us keep all of The Spinoff's award-winning journalism free for everybody by becoming a member today at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Kia ora e te iwi, Te Aihe Butler here, podcast manager at The Spinoff. If you enjoy listening to our podcasts, consider supporting our mahi by signing up to become a Spin-Off member at thespinoff.co.nz/donate. The Spin-Off Podcast Network.